We recognise as a relatively large agricultural holding that we have capacity to not only reduce emissions but to actively pull carbon out of the atmosphere. And one of the approaches that we identified there was soil carbon. Duxton Apples are an apple producer in South Australia. 2 orchard sites, one in the state southeast in Angwarrie and the other here in Loxton. So we produce a variety of apples, around 7,000 tonnes a year, which equates to around 25% of South Australia's apple production, depending on the season. We haven't historically had any strategic approach to managing the noxious weeds in the orchard. So throughout parts of the year, the weeds would be dominant, and through other parts they'd be completely absent, which would leave the soil bare, which would create a bunch of issues both for the production trees but also for the general soil health, so soil biology, soil structure and water holding capacity. So what we really wanted to do was implement a more strategic approach to how we manage that floor cover and the species that we introduce there, and have a more holistic approach to the total orchard system. One way in which we look to do that is to introduce native species. We identified a number of species that could be utilised and that wouldn't cause production issues or other issues to productivity. One of those being saltbush. We also recognise that saltbush are local to this area. They have a wide distribution, but they exist naturally here, so we knew that they would perform well in the orchard setting, and that they had the specific traits that we were looking for. One, being able to persist throughout the year and cover the soil and reduce that radiant heat, and the other, being able to create a large mat that didn't get too high and require numerous slashing efforts. So the other big objective for us was to actually understand what the process is of lodging a carbon project and how that system works. And through that process we understood that there's some pretty big challenge in alley crop systems. One being how we actually map the different management zones. How we manage the under tree area is completely different to how we manage the mid-rows, which led us to having to use some drone technology to be able to map those areas to the level of precision required by the regulator.
Yeah, so Duxton's approached us and said, we'd really like to measure some of the carbon that we think we're sequestering into the apple trees. And that was really about using LiDAR in 2 modes, both on the drone, but also in handheld mode, so that we could scan the trees and convert that known volume of the tree into a bulk density, or look at the bulk densities and the water content of the tree and actually convert that into a known amount of tonnes of carbon per tree. We're able to collaboratively get more information about what's going on below the soil from a carbon sequestration perspective, but also above ground into trees. It's giving more information about how we're actually sequestering carbon into complementary things. I mean, the soil's a really critical medium in terms of growing anyway, but getting measurements and data for the first time out of that in a method that's consistent.
For us, it's as much about being able to implement sustainable practices rather than the carbon itself. Through the potential revenue that will flow through the carbon, it has just allowed us to implement these practices, and also through the funding from PIRSA. Without that, it's really hard to try these sort of more unique approaches to how we manage our systems.
If you're not measuring what it is in the soil, or you're not measuring what it is that you're putting into trees and all that sort of thing, well, you don't have the information. So you want to be telling that story about, we've done good stuff, you know, we've got all this soil carbon building up, we've got all these trees building up, and that's going to be really vital information. Where do we sit? Where are the areas that we might need to pay more attention to? Where are the areas that have got opportunity from a carbon neutrality perspective?
Orchard systems by nature are highly derived, so there's only so many things we can do to try and make them more sustainable. We're always going to need to do slashing, we're always going to need to perform those sort of actions, and all we can do is look for sustainable approaches where we can minimise those efforts.